All right, so now we're going to be looking at Chapter 2 of the Design of Everyday Things. And in this chapter, you were introduced to what Norman is calling the psychology of everyday actions. So when we're making a human-centered design, in order to understand our users as human beings and understand their needs, we're going to have to get into their heads a little bit, engage in a little bit of psychology in order to understand what we need to do with our designs. So Norman starts out talking about getting emotional. And he's doing it in a different sense here than kind of what we've discussed before when we discussed getting emotional. We're talking about people feeling bad or frustrated or even stupid for not knowing how to do something, for not knowing how to use a device. Think about that juicer we saw in the last video. If you were given that and told to use it, you might feel pretty dumb when you realize that you didn't really know how to use it. So that's how our users feel when we're making websites that are difficult to use. And so, when they're getting that incomplete or confusing system image, like we talked about in Chapter 1, it has a negative impact on our users, and that's going to drive them away from our sites. And that's not their fault. It's our fault as designers. Because what they have is they've developed a misconception based on a system image. And the world and everyday things and everything you come into contact with, they're filled with misconceptions. The best way to deal with these are to cut them off at the head. Because we can. If your user comes to your website and they have a full picture of the system image and everything is clear with affordances and signifiers and feedback, then they can be confident. And being able to be confident in using something makes a user happy. Either way, whether something is usable or not, it's based on our perception. Norman talks about Aristotle's naive physics. Basically, whatever we perceive becomes our naive way of explaining a phenomena that we don't understand or that we don't have knowledge of yet. So your naivete can give you an incorrect explanation for a real-world phenomenon. So what we have to do is we have to be able to meet the users where they're at so they can assuage this naive view. It's practical, it's common to have this kind of viewpoint, but it's wrong. And so what we end up with are gulfs of execution and evaluation. So when we're looking at the gulf of execution, we're asking ourselves the question, does the system provide actions that correspond to the intentions of the user? So is how to use your website clear? And if so, can people use your website for the things that they want to use it for? That's the gulf of evaluation. That's the gulf between where your user is with their preconceptions, their naive physics, you know, the things that they have in their mind, the things that they have developed in their mind about your website versus what your website actually does versus your goals that you're trying to accomplish through your website. They're separated by a chasm, kind of like in the picture that we've seen here. And then the gulf of evaluation. Does the system provide a physical representation that can be directly perceived and that is directly interpretable in terms of the intentions and expectations of the user? So this goes into affordances, this goes into signifiers, this goes into feedback, this goes into having that full, complete system image. Okay, gulf of execution. Does the system provide actions that correspond to the intentions of the user? Can the user use this website the way they want to use it? And then if we've bridged that gap, of execution, we come to the gulf of evaluation and we say, well, if it does do what they want to do, can they do it? Based on the information that they're given on the screen. So the question is, how do we bridge this chasm between the user and our goals, between the user and our designs, our websites? And we do that through the 7 stages of action. And the 7 stages of action, to remind you from your reading, we're talking about forming the goal, forming the intention, specifying an action, executing the action, perceiving the state of the world, interpreting the state of the world, and evaluating the outcome. All right, so we're coming up with a goal. This is our goal. This is what we want to accomplish. And then we are going to form the intention. So how are we going to accomplish our goal? Or rather, now that we have our goal, we want to accomplish our goal. We have an intention to act. Well, once we have that intention to act, we have to come up with an action, come up with something to do that can allow us to achieve our goal. So we have a goal. We have a motivation, an intention to act. Now we have an action that will help us achieve our goal, maybe. Then we execute said action. And these are all in the execution phase of a design. Now, once we have that, we also have the evaluation phase, and this is all cyclical. When we're talking about research, these are the kinds of things that we're talking about. So we're saying perceiving the state of the world. And this is in relation to our goal. So perceiving the state of the world, does the world need what we want out of our goal? Is there a place for what we want to design, for our ideas in the world? That's perceiving the state of the world and interpreting the state of the world together. Because you have to examine the world, see where things might be lacking. When we're talking about solving problems, this is where you're finding your problem. In the evaluation of the state of the world, what you're looking at, and then how you interpret what you're looking at. So you can say, wow, this community is underserved for news that relates to them. I want to build a news website that's related to this group of people in particular. So that's your perception of the state of the world being that this segment of the population is uninformed of what's going on. And then so you can interpret that into saying that they need more news about what's going on in their neighborhood. And then you're evaluating the outcome of your interpretation, whether or not it actually works in practice. So all this has to do with research. Let's look at a model of all these steps in action that will help us make more sense of all this. So I say this is a cyclical process, and this is your research process. You're coming up with goals, and your goals relate to things that exist in the world. Now, from your goals, you develop an intention to act. So you want an intention, so you come up with the motivation to meet your goals that you've developed. And then from this intention to act, you come up with various different actions. And then the execution of the action sequence, actually putting the designs into place. And then that's put out into the world. And then from that, you're perceiving the state of the world. You are looking at how the world is now, that the execution of this action sequence that you've put into place exists. So you're saying, okay, I identified this problem. I got motivated to do something. I came up with some things to do, and then I did them, and now they're out into the world. Did that solve the problem? Is the problem still there? So is the problem still there? I do my research. I figure out how it impacts the people that I intended to serve. And so I perceive the state of the world. I interpret that perception of what's out in the world. And then I evaluate, and then and only then can I evaluate whether or not I met my goal. So it's all cyclical. And if I didn't meet my goal, then I go back to the drawing board. Now, your goals have to be informed by research. Now, we've talked about research. We've talked about identifying problems, and we've talked about identifying the right problem and how things of that nature work. So really, when you're thinking about identifying your goals in this model here, you want to start on the side of the world. You want to start on the side of the perception and work back toward your goals, instead of starting with some ideas for some goals and then working toward putting them out into the world. If you do that, then you're going to be more clear up front in your goals. They're going to make more sense. You're going to go back to the drawing board fewer times, and you're going to have a more ready product for your users. And so that is how you can use research and use the 7 stages of action to inform your goals, to inform your designs, and bridge the gap between individuals, your users, human beings in the world, and your designs, your websites. Because remember, I'll say it once, I'll say it 1,000 times, real people are using these websites. So we want human-centered design. We want to do things that people need, and we want to do them in manners that they're expecting them to be done. And those types of things are going to make our design better every single time. And so that's chapter 2 of the design of everyday things in a nutshell. Thank you for watching.